Hey, welcome back to Leavetherest. I'm Caleb Bridges, and it's been quite a while since I've made a video, but I have some new ideas, and I'm hoping to start making some new videos in the weeks to come, so stay tuned. But for today, I wanted to talk about the fear of God. This is a topic that I think as Christians, most of us have at one point or another thought, what does it really mean to fear God? Because Scripture talks a lot about it. Just in a few places in Proverbs, it says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The fear of the Lord is hatred of evil. The fear of the Lord prolongs life. And then in the book of Isaiah, it says the spirit of wisdom and understanding, the spirit of counsel and power, the spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord, and he will delight in the fear of the Lord. And then another neat thing too, I'm an Orthodox Christian, and at the moment that the priest comes out right before Holy Communion, he always makes this statement. He says, with the fear of God, with faith and with love, draw near. And so we see this common theme throughout Scripture where it not only refers to the fear of God as being this building block or this foundation for our relationship with God, but it says it's a good thing, it's a blessing, and so I think for us many times though we think about fear always in a negative context, right? Well, I wanted to just look up a general definition of what fear is defined as just in Webster's dictionary, and this was the definition it gave. It says an unpleasant, often strong, emotion caused by an anticipation or an awareness of danger. I would say that's probably most of the time we define fear, but there's also a second definition. It says profound reverence, awe, and respect, especially toward God. And it was this definition that I thought was really neat because I think that more closely aligns with what we believe when we talk about the fear of God in a positive context within Scripture. Not too long ago, I was reading a book, and I can't quite remember the title. I read too many books at once, it's a problem of mine. But in this book, basically, it was talking about the different stages or levels of fear. And it was talking about how we advance through these. And when we first begin our relationship with God, our fear of God looks one way. And then as we advance, it looks differently. And the example he gave is he looked at, or he talked about there being three levels. The first level was the fear of God as a slave. The second was the fear of God as a servant. And the third was the fear of God as a son. And the fear of God as a slave, basically the slave is always fearful of his master in the sense that he's fearful of punishment. He's fearful of what will be done to him negatively if he doesn't do something correct. So he's afraid of receiving punishment. And as Christians, I think sometimes when we first start our relationship with God, our fear of God is very based on we're afraid of sinning or doing something wrong because we're afraid of God doing, sending us to hell or damning us or doing something really terrible to us. But the second stage is the stage of a servant. And if you think about a servant isn't so much afraid of being punished as much as they're afraid of not receiving their reward or their wage, right? So a servant's mindset is, okay, if I do something wrong, I might not get my reward. And as Christians, when we reach this stage of a fear of God, many times it's not that we're thinking about what God will do to us, it's we're afraid of what God will take away from us. We think, well, man, if I give into this sin or if I struggle with that thing, then, God's not going to bless my life. I'm going to have a hard time. I'm going to struggle. But it's the third stage, which is obviously the final stage, and that's the stage of the Son. And the stage of the Son is one in which there is a fear not of losing something, not of being punished necessarily. There's a fear of losing the relationship, of breaking the connection and the relationship with the Father. And I think the important thing about understanding this with reference to fear is that what kind of relationship do we have with God if my only motivation for doing something or not doing something is purely based on a fear of being punished or a fear of not getting something? You see, ultimately as Christians, what should motivate us, what should spurn us to wanting to please God and obey Him is a love for Him. And love is based in a relationship. And so when we fear God at this final level, this final stage, it means we have a reverence, we have an awe, we have a respect. And ultimately, our fear is losing that relationship. Our fear is doing something that would separate us from it. And I think that that is what really godly fear looks like in many ways. You know, I think a good question to ask ourselves is, well, how can I increase my fear of God in a healthy way? And ultimately, in what we see many of the early church fathers talk about is the way that we can increase our fear of God is by dwelling on and thinking about our death. Now, I know your first thought is, wow, that sounds really depressing, but it's not so much that I'm sitting here just thinking about death in general. The reason that we think about our own death is because what it reminds us of is that life is short. It reminds us that God could come and take us at any time, and it spurns us into wanting to make sure that we're right with God now, that I'm pursuing God to the fullest of my ability now. And so I think a great way to increase a healthy sense of a fear of God is by meditating, one, on the shortness of life or on my own death, and that allowing that to motivate in me the desire not to wait. You know, I think as Christians, many times we sit around and we have that thought, we've all done it, where we think, I know I need to do this, or I know I need to stop doing that. I'm going to get to it next week. I'm going to get to it tomorrow. I'm going to get around to it next New Year resolution type of thing. But the reality is we have to realize that life is short. And that when I meditate on my own death, the fact that I could die at any moment, what that normally does is it causes me to want to say, no, I'm not waiting. I'm doing it now. And so that's a great way to increase our fear of God. A second way is, I would say, through obedience. I think obedience leads to obedience, if you will. And through obeying God, I learned to love Him more, and I learned to fear Him in a greater way. So I know that this has been pretty far from a thorough explanation of a fear of God. These were just a few thoughts and ideas that I read and I found encouraging, and I hope they've been for you as well. So thanks for listening. Stay tuned in the weeks to come for some new videos, and I appreciate it.